Hey guys, welcome back to day number 9's video on these daily vlog series. I figured today we'd actually cover something a little bit more to do with the pro side of things, and it's game balance and whether pro players should be involved in that decision, where, when, all the kind of pondering, right? So where to start with this? I guess you could start with how you get to this point of balancing issues in the first place, right? Which is, as a designer, you have 3 pillars you're working around. And three ways of envisioning like the way that the game interacts with the player, basically. You've got your game mechanics, you've got your game dynamics, and you've got your game aesthetics. I'll just add aesthetics out of the way because that's a little bit less important in this comparison, is that it's about the emotions that you invoke in the player. So that can be something like, does a feature frustrate them? And how can I, do I want it to frustrate them? The ones that matter are game mechanics. So game mechanics are things that the developer implement that you will be able to do. Things like shooting, running, jumping, farting. I don't know why you want farting in your game, but you know what? Abe Odyssey probably had a bigger brain than all of us. Dynamics is where it gets interesting. So dynamics is what you perceive that a player can do with the game mechanics. So for example, if I said running and jumping and shooting, then you're like, yeah, you can move around while shooting. Whereas if you compare like the old days like Quake and Unreal Tournament, while the developer saw that, the pro player saw something else. This is where it gets interesting, right? Is you have these preconceived ideas and it's like someone else coming in and debating your idea. So the thing that the pro players saw back then was rocket jumping, right? Because the game developer would have seen the game mechanics of like a rocket launcher and the dynamics being like you knock people around, you do AoE damage. What they wouldn't have maybe imagined is someone was going to use that to propel themselves around the place. And that's where pro players can see things that you can't. That's where other people can see things that you can't. The difference with pro players, of course, is in a given genre, in a given category of games, they probably have a better, deeper understanding than most people on how to make it fair or how to spot things that slide under the radar. So let's think whether players should be involved based on that merit. Well, I don't think it's if, I think it's where. If your game is competitive, is step one, right? So if you're making a game that's competitive, you already had a conscious decision that your game is about people versus people, or people versus something, competing maybe on a leaderboard or something if they're not competing directly. So in that regard, you want balance in your game. And then it comes down to whether your game should be esports from the ground up. I think that's like one differential that matters straight away. So games that were designed to be esports scenes from the ground up, Apex Legends would be, not Apex Legends, sorry, Valorant would be the perfect example right now in everyone's mind. Apex Legends wasn't really intended to be esports scene, but it was intended to be competitive out of the gate. So Valorant, let's focus on that first of all, right? Valorant is a game that understood it wanted to be an esports scene from the get-go, and thus they have former pro players on the development team. I think the biggest one would probably be Volcano, CSGO map designer. He's the guy that created Cash. He was also a former pro player. I believe he played 1.6 CSGO, and that kind of knowledge. I mean, he's already of a pedigree that he made Cash, right? That is a popular map. It's very well known. He's already proved himself to a certain degree, and then he has the knowledge to back that up from being a pro player. Undoubtedly, one helped the other already when it came to Cash and creating that map, right? And those type of games really benefit from having the designer element of things influenced heavily, if not guided by pro players, because you already know that you want your game to be an esports scene. So your first thought should be, okay, we need to make this kind of legit. I feel like we'd be better off having someone who has the knowledge in-house and is tappable and accessible from an early point in the development cycle. Because you know what you want your game to be, an esports scene, you probably have inspirations from different games, so you should know the people you want to bring in. Apex Legends, on the other hand, wasn't really intended to be a competitive game straight away, or their esports game. See, I'm making the differentiation wrong. An esports game, but it was meant to be competitive. That's why they very early on got Ghost A Army, a former Halo player, involved. He came across from 343, I believe, the Halo developers, and he's now senior system designer. So he was not there straight away, but I think he got in early, he liked what he saw, and then he got involved in the process and helped shape it into what ended up being quite an amazing launch for that game, very unexpectedly. And this is the point that you should have these people that can influence, but maybe, it's that kind of balance of, do you want them to be in full control, right? So in Gosiame's position, he worked up to a position of power, but he came on a product that like already had a kind of skeleton structure, and then he expanded upon it. And I think it's good to have multiple voices. So it's that case, you don't need to hire all these people, but you should have advisories or have people you can talk to from different pro games. What would you like to see? What do you think makes this work very well? What makes the game tick? That's important. And then there are games that don't want to be an esports scene, don't intend to be an esports scene. The most obvious one I can give you is probably going to be Nintendo. I think that's the one that everyone knows and talks about. Recently, I believe Nintendo have shown an interest in esports to an extent, but for a long time they have been criticized and very much hated on by their community for not supporting the game. And that's really because Nintendo didn't. It's to do with the company culture and how they didn't really care for esports. That wasn't their focus. I'll say. Don't care is maybe unfair. They didn't see that as their primary focus of the game, and instead they just pursued the product in itself without needing esports as like an advertising tool or a forefront or a prestigious banner to have. And as a result, Smash over the years has had issues with huge balancing issues around things like ice climbers in certain games or Bayonetta in another. And these sort of issues, if they had at least got a pro player involved in the process early on, whether it's as an advisor, as a designer, whatever, or giving them early access and alpha, beta, and taking feedback from that, there's a good chance that these type of very easily exploitable characters that were pretty OP maybe wouldn't have made it through. And that's kind of the highlight, that even if you don't mean for your game to have an esports scene, even if it accidentally becomes one, which is a whole other part of the discussion, which, like, if your game accidentally becomes an esports scene, you then have a critical decision: do you want to take it seriously in the esports scene? If you do, then it's even more important, this piece of advice. You should have the best players, the people that are very good at your games, involved in the discussion at least. You don't have to necessarily give them control. I think that's like a big thing that people misunderstand, is that they think, what people are expecting of us is for us to listen to the pro player. No, you should just take the advice and weigh it, right? It's that whole idea that someone's telling you that, you're painting a picture and someone's telling you that this green would be better than that green for the meadow. And you might disagree, but the whole point is how you justify your disagreement. And if your game is meant to be competitive, tapping into the casuals wouldn't like it area is not a good counter argument. So the reason I highlight into that is because there's been a reasonable discussion around whether, I believe Rainbow Six is the one at the moment that's been getting quite a bit, whether the game should be balanced around the pros or not. And the answer is very simply, it should be balanced around the pro level play. So that's the difference. Like, you don't take the individual pro's opinion, you take the overarching level play and what seems OP at the highest level. The reason you do this is because the people complaining down, like at this skill level, they're just going to complain no matter what you change it to, because there's always something to complain about, right? Especially when a game is unbalanced, there's always something to complain about. The whole point is you should look to get to a point where everything is balanced at the optimal level, the efficient way of playing the game. Because for these low-level players, like we talk about meta for pros all the time, there's a meta that takes place at lower ranks as well. And that's going to change, whether for the better or worse, it doesn't matter. It will change, and people will change the way they play. So there's no point trying to cater to them and pat them on the head and make them feel good. They're enjoying the game now. They'll enjoy the game a few days after a major patch. A midpoint that some developers try to undertake to kind of separate these two, and it's usually one of the better ways to begin with. I still think like core balance of like heroes, game mechanics, like it should be balanced around skill if you're a competitive game. But a soft way of kind of balancing these issues around it being too intense for casual players is to do things like soft padded variables. Things like drafting, for example, is a big one for Rainbow Six, where you can ban certain heroes in competitive, right? Or in Dota 2, where you have captain's mode and you have a ban phase, pick phase, right? In casual games, you just pick the heroes you want. You can ban some at the start, but then you pick the heroes you want. In Rainbow Six, I don't think they even have a ban system right now in the unranked, I want to say. So you just pick and play. And that's how you allow your casual audience to exist without feeling too intensely locked in by certain rule sets, which exist for mainly targeted at the competitive side of things. And those systems are good. I think devs shouldn't go further than that. In that, I've heard people talk about the idea of branch development, where developers will basically have their product and now they create 2 iterations of that product, and one will be casual and one will be competitive. That is bad because it just means more turnaround time to actually get anything out and ready, because any implementation you make here that seems decent then has to be transferred across to this separately, because they are no longer identical, and you basically have to find a way to implement it across board, which means more development time, and it's just a lot more money down the drain for developers. I don't think that's a feasible way that most developers want to pursue, and I don't think they should want to. But I think the takeaway really here is that when you look at it from a development perspective, I'll reiterate what I said earlier. If your game is meant to be competitive, you should have pros involved in the process. Don't take one pro's comment and then read it as gospel, because of course you don't know if, like, for example, let's say I was in charge of designing Dota now, and I took the advice of X pro player on what balance I should make to a hero, and then he went and won a major. Oops, looks like he had his own, own horse to ride there, right? Like, he had his own kind of nefarious plan. That can happen, sure, but that's why you get many opinions. Obviously, the difference is if you have a pro player, former pro player on your design team or development team, they're not a player anymore. So while they might be opinionated in ways that might be outdated or whatever, they at least have a better understanding than you probably do of how a competitive scene in that genre would work, and they no longer have a horse in the race. That's my thoughts on it. In general, to round up, I think pro players should be involved in the process, and whether you give them X power or next to no power is up to you, but you should definitely have your ear ready and you should be listening to them. Don't treat your ideas like some coveted gold mine that no one else discovered yet and you want to keep top secret. Because quite often when you hide things from everyone, you have no way of knowing if it's good or not in a creative sense, right? Don't change what you're doing, but at the same time, don't change. Don't be completely locked to your ideas. Be willing to see other people's perspective and understand them. Even if it ends up being a pointless perspective after 10 minutes of listening, it's the thought process that made you realize why it's good or bad. That's going to be it for this video, guys. Hopefully this came out clear. This is like the 3rd time recording because there's a lot of construction going on around me. But thank you for watching, and if you like what you saw, be sure to hit the like buttons down below. Make sure you comment. I think this went on a little bit longer than I intended. I'm going to try and make these a little bit shorter in the future videos, but that is it. Thank you for tuning in, guys, and I will see you in the next one.